before you ask anyone for anything, sit down and brainstorm, do some thinking time around how could I add genuine value to their world? What actual difference could I make? Not what I think is valuable, but what would actually be valuable to them.
Welcome to the Grant Wise Show. This podcast helps ordinary real estate agents build extraordinary companies. Let's grow in 3, 2. Hey, what's up, guys? Grant Wise here, and welcome back to the Grant Wise Show. I'm excited for my guest today. I've got none other than Jairek Robbins. He is a peak performance coach that helps you conquer life's biggest challenges, and I'm excited for him to walk through and help us conquer some of our own today. So Jairek, man, thanks so much for stopping by the show.
Totally. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it a ton. Well, the entire premise of the show is we help ordinary people build extraordinary companies. So we like to interview people that are doing extraordinary things and just kind of ask them how they did it. So tell us your story, man. How have you put yourself in a position that you're doing the extraordinary things you are today?
Most of it's just falling in love with the process. And there was probably some distinctions along the way that made the biggest difference. All the way back in the beginning, my first job was security at Blockbuster Video, and I was really big on results, measurable difference. And so I found out that 60% of the theft dropped within 30 days of me starting as security. So apparently I could scare off some DVD thieves. I was like superpower. But I was only 14 at the time. So that was kind of my first job. My first real business job was working in our family's nonprofit. And so I love helping people. It was my favorite thing to do. I still think it's the best work on the planet. And so we were helping homeless people. We were helping youth leadership. We were helping people in prisons. We were helping all kinds of different, initiatives that people who actually needed help. And we were delivering real, tangible difference that we could measure to them. The only part I didn't love about that one was the paycheck that came with it. It was, it seemed like I was getting crumbs for such great work. And I was like, why do we get paid so little when we do such great work in the world? That doesn't make any sense. And I look at what bankers make or what these other people make. I'm like, they're not necessarily doing great work in the world, but look how much they make. That's insane. Like, that doesn't seem right. It seems like the system's backwards. It should be the opposite. And I remember I walked across the courtyard and I went and talked with a friend of mine who was running the coaching department at the time. And her name was Charlotte. And I asked her, I'm like, what do these people do? She's like, well, they help people. I'm like, how do they help people? Well, the coaches help people be healthier, be happier, build their business, have better relationships. And I was like, ooh, that's cool. So they help people all day. And they how much do these people get paid? And so she showed me, and I was like, whoa, that's way more than what I make working at the nonprofit. And I was like, are you sure they really help people? And she's like, absolutely. That's all they focus on is how to help their clients achieve better results. I was like, that's so cool. And I was 18 years old. And I remember I asked her, I'm like, can I do it? And she gave me one of those responses where she's like, well, sure you can. I was like, no, seriously, can I do it? Like, can I move my office from over there to over here and do this? And she was like, well, maybe. She's like, one thing, you'd have to get trained. So there's, 250 hours of training you'd have to go through. And we'd have to, first give you maybe 3 clients and make sure that you get great results. And based on that feedback, either we're going to have to retrain you or we'll give you more clients. And then from there, you'll need, monthly training, yearly training. We really have to get you up and we'll have to give you a test to make sure you really understand all the materials and tools and how to guide people through it. So I went through all of that and then got the stamp of approval, and they gave me clients. And so I was 18, going to college, taking classes, and then coaching in between all my classes. And so that's where I started as far as coaching. And that was always a passion, and it was fun, and it was exciting, and it was humbling. It was one of those things where I remember the first time someone signed up and he was a coach. He was much more senior than me. He had been doing coaching for like 15 years. He was a former CEO and major executive of a publicly traded company. He had achieved everything under the moon and back. And he signed up for coaching and specifically asked to work with me. And I remember being like, oh, great, I got a new client. So I opened the file and I read through the paperwork. And my confidence was like, is he messing with me? Are you sure he asked for me? I don't know what I can offer this guy. Like, he's done everything. And I haven't done those things yet. And I remember I got on the phone and I started my initial intake. And the first question, I'm like, okay, I just have to ask, why in the world would you ask for me as a coach? I'm only 18. I'm new. I'm still finishing school. I haven't done the things you've done. Like, why are you asking for me? And he said, I've been coached by some of the best coaches on earth for, last decades of my life. I've also become a coach. I've learned the skills. I've learned the tools. I practice them daily. And he said, sometimes when you've been around something for so long, you don't know how to look at it from a new set of perspective or a new set of eyes. He says, I hired you because you don't have any experience in what I do. I hired you because you haven't been doing this for, at that time, 20 years. I hired you because you don't know all the normal things people say again and again and again when you get to my stage and age. And he said, you're new. We'll bring up a topic that you have no experience in, and you'll share with me an idea that no one in my stage of business is willing to say out loud because that's not, quote unquote, how we do it. And he said, that's why I hired you. I hired you for a fresh set of eyes and a fresh new perspective. And my response was, okay, let's see what we can do. I don't know what to say to that, but it sounds okay to me. Let's go for it. And so, he was one of my clients. I remember when I finally left on my own, my very first client, I signed up 6 years later. He was a lawyer at a major law firm in London, and he wanted to work on time management. And I knew I could coach on the things that I had mastered in my own life, the experience that I had strength in, where I knew how to help someone navigate that path. And so I was coaching this guy, and he hired me for time management. We optimized the time, got him way more productive, figured out how to completely optimize his life and schedule and work and everything he did. And we did so well that he was my first person who started referring me to other business owners and other clients of even his. I was like, well, that's really cool. So that referral base really helped. But at that time, my business was growing at, 1 or 2 clients a month, or maybe 3 or 4 if it was a good month, which is what most coaches do when they get started. And I remember I made a partnership, and someone taught me this. They said a great partnership has 3 pieces. It has a personal relationship. So someone has know, like, and trust. It has reach. So relationship is number 1. Reach is number 2. It's on, in some way, they have reach into your target audience. And then the last is they have a world-class product or service. And so I teamed up with this lady in Los Angeles. She had direct access to over 10,000 small business owners that she was communicating with regularly. They knew a little bit about who I was, and they knew a little bit about her. So we had a light relationship with them, and her and I co-created a product together that we could bring to market. And when we did that, I remember we ran our first event, and I signed up 20 clients in a day. And I was only like maybe 18, 19, 20, maybe 24 years old. And I remember 20 clients in a day when most people would sign up like 2 to 3 a month. I was like, holy smokes, this is going to work. This is crazy. And so we figured out that partnership model, and we're like, ooh, I wonder if it's repeatable. So we did this a bunch of times, and all of a sudden I had 20 clients, then 40 clients, and 60 clients. And at that time, if you know anything about coaches, too many clients. And so I was like, wow, in 8 months, I had the result that most people struggle with. And it came through building a powerful partnership and learning those 3 pieces to a powerful partnership, and then really doing it. And from that point, I had a friend reach out in London and ask me, hey, I teach coaches marketing and sales. Would you mind flying out and sharing how in the world you grew your business so fast in such a short period of time? I said, sure. So it was my first big speaking event. I flew to the other side of the world and went and spoke to a room of like 400 people. And then you fast forward from there. And now it's crazy to think about. I've been doing this for 20 years on my own. So 2 decades on my own, plus 6 years with Dad. And in 20 years, we now have clients in 131 countries around the world. And it's a blessing. My wife and I have only been to 40 countries, which is still a lot, but it's only 40. But we have clients in 131 of those countries, most of which we've never even physically been to.
That's awesome. I love the story, man. I always appreciate getting to hear people share their experiences and what, they feel like are some of the most powerful things that they can teach other people, and to see what you've built and made of yourself is really cool. So I appreciate you sharing that and sharing some of the lessons. I want to go back to what you said about, you had kind of figured out the partnership model. And I think that we live in the age where I guess I could probably see it both ways. Some people believe in competition, some people believe in collaboration. But could you speak more to how you've seen partnerships, transform your business? Is this an idea you take into every venture now? It's like, how can we partner with the best people? Like, can you kind of walk us through that a little bit more from a business standpoint?
Totally. So I'm trying to think of the right example. If it's people just getting started, partnerships are mostly going to be, I'm trying to think of the right level of an example. I've seen this happen from very small local partnerships all the way to massive global partnerships. Let me give you a different example, something to think about. So I remember when Twitter first came out and people were learning how to tweet, and, the new cutting edge hip people, like, we knew how to tweet, but general, like, businesses and corporations, they didn't know how to tweet or like really tweet. And I had this friend in San Diego, his name was Chris. He started charging businesses $5,000 a month to tweet for them. I thought this was the biggest scam in the world. I was like, someone's paying you to tweet for them? Like, how slow are they? They can't figure out how to come up with 127 characters on their own. This was pre-ChatGPT, so you actually had to write all the characters. And I was like, my gosh, how lazy are people? Like, are they incompetent? What's wrong with them? Why can't they figure this out? I had so much judgment. And I was like, I feel like this guy's scamming people. $5,000 a tweet? Are you joking? I thought this was bananas. And he was like, no, I understand how to tweet and when to tweet and what to tweet and the tone of the tweet. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's really pitching people on something. And he was making this business around tweeting for people. But then I'll fast forward. I was coaching a startup. They had raised a couple $100 million for their startup, and they went and engaged or wanted to engage VaynerMedia. So Gary Vaynerchuk's company on social media. And they got a proposal from Gary to run their social media for $850,000 a year. And I was like, I thought $5,000 a month was a scam. Holy cow. And I was like, have they done this for anyone else? And I'm like, can they send a list of clients or people they work with? And it was like the NFL, the NBA, L'Oreal, Budweiser. I was like, oh shit. Wow. They figured out how to charge a significant amount of money to these major corporations to run social media. And I was like, again, I feel like you could hire an intern that knows how to tweet or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever the world you're trying to. $800,000, you could hire a bunch of people to run your whole department for you. This sounded absurd. And what I was thinking about, though, is if you go back to the partnership model, there were three pieces. How was this coming to be? How in the world could someone be charging almost $1 million to run a social media account? How in the world is that justified? Well, was there reach? A lot of times, if you look at where reach was knowing how to navigate the platform. The platforms have hundreds of millions of people on them. So there is massive reach if you know how to navigate the platform. Was there a relationship? Oftentimes, these brands have a relationship, but we had to figure out what kind of relationship they wanted with their people. And I was like, that's interesting. And they, as a brand, they could either figure that out themselves, which some have hit some road bumps recently trying to figure that out, or they could team up with someone who's very connected to the pulse of what people on those platforms are into, what they're like, what they watch, what's trending, what's new, what's hip, what's cool, what's fun. And if they could understand the pulse of those platforms, which Gary and team do, and they figured out the reach, how to actually break through the noise and get seen and get views, now they need a world-class product or service. And hopefully these companies are saying what they provide might be that world-class product or service. And all of a sudden, that's an $850,000 a year contract. And I'm sure it's much more with the major brands he does. This was a startup. But that blows my mind. And you're watching how those dots were connected. And then if you watch the results, and this is where Gary differentiated from even normal television or magazine advertisement, like those died. TV's still okay, but magazines are dead. And it's the concept of what happened was he would say, go run a Super Bowl ad and you tell me the exact measurable impact it had. Now let me run that same ad with the same budget on social ads and let me show you the exact metrics. I could show you who saw it, when they saw it, what they did next, how long they landed on the page, when they clicked, what they clicked, how often they clicked, when they left, how we got them back, when we got them to buy, how long they stood as a customer, their lifetime value. I can show you every metric imaginable. Show me that from your TV ad. And everyone kind of shrugs and goes, I don't know. Or here's the best we have. And so all of a sudden he was able to show results so clearly that it became very difficult to justify any other way of doing it. People still do, but it's hard to justify when you compare the two. And so I took that concept in the coaching. And I said, okay, I went and listened to coaches, and most coaches I hear, we have this phrase in the industry where they say, the client's results are not my responsibility. It's the client's job to do the work, and their results are up to them. I said, that sounds kind of like a Super Bowl ad. Hey, I'll give you the platform. You play your Budweiser ad, and your results are up to you. That depends on how well your commercial works. And I was like, how do I Gary Vaynerchuk the coaching industry? How do I create measurement that we can actually track? And how do I help people participate in the right behaviors where we can see the metrics change by the choices they make? And then I went on a hunt. Can I find gear? So there's a cool tool we use that measures, it's a medical grade EEG brain scan that I can have someone meditate every morning, and I can see how well they can focus, how well they can stay calm, and how active their brain waves are for 10 minutes. Now, you can either look at that as a brain training tool, or I can look at that as a measurement tool. I can say, based on what you ate, how well you slept, and what you chose to focus on, here's how well you can focus your mind right now. And as an entrepreneur or a business owner, if you can't clear and focus your mind for 10 minutes, what's the likelihood you're going to be able to do that for the rest of the day? Slim to none. There's no way you're going to be able to. If you can't do it for 10 minutes, you're not going to do it for 10 hours. And so that process, can we change your diet? Can we change your sleep pattern? Can we change your health activities? Can we change what you do? And will it actually change the metrics? And so I started off with kind of meditation tracking, and then new trackers came out. We figured out how to track people's breathing patterns so we can tell when they're calm, when they're tense, or when they're focused. We figured out how to track people's heart rate and stress levels throughout the day. We eventually figured out how to start pulling people's blood samples and seeing what their hormone panels look like, and what food is the right food for their system. I always tell a fun joke with people where I said, hey, if you went out and bought a Bugatti or one of these fancy race cars, you spent $2 million on it. Would you be cool if someone poured, let's say it's a gasoline engine? Would you be cool if I put jet fuel in it thinking it might go faster? No, are you an idiot? You don't put jet fuel in a car. That's stupid. You'll break the engine. I was like, well, jet fuel makes jets go fast. Why won't it make a car go faster? You're like, that's stupid. It's not how it works. And I was like, okay, so you're telling me I'm not allowed to put the wrong fuel into the wrong machine. It has to be the right fuel for the right machine. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm stupid, and that's just a dumb thought. Yeah. Okay, good. How do I know what the right fuel to put in you is? Because if you're putting sand in if you put sand in the Bugatti engine, you're going to kill the engine. What's your version of sand that you eat every day, and you don't know you're screwing up your internal engine of your body? And how do we get the right fuel in you? Well, how do we determine that? That was usually saved for pro athletes, billionaires, and I don't know, whoever else could afford the expensive doctors to go run the DNA test, the blood samples, all the gut bacteria test to find out here is the exact fuel you need to eat. And then I went and talked to a friend of mine who used to be a performance coach for F1 race teams. They would measure their blood sugar. And with their blood sugar, they would figure out not only what to eat, but when to eat it. That started blowing my mind. He said, watch this. Eat the same meal 3 days in a row at the exact same time. Let's say 11 a.m., you're going to eat lunch 3 days in a row. On day one, I want you to do nothing. Just eat the meal. Do not work out. Do not walk. Don't do anything. On day two, I want you to go for a 15-minute brisk walk before eating the meal. On day three, I want you to go for a 15-minute brisk walk after eating the meal. And watch map your blood sugar levels on all 3 days and watch the difference it makes. I was like, you got to be joking me. My body, it's a meal. It's a healthy meal. It's salmon and rice and broccoli. What in the world is going to be different? Universal, like absolute universe is a part of how my body processes that meal. Same meal, exercise before, during, or none, it processes it totally differently. And I was like, wow. And if our ability to stay focused might have something to do with our ability to maintain a level and even blood sugar, we might need to know, how does our body process fuels? And so this is the kind of stuff we work on. And depending on what level people want to engage with me, we can go really deep on figuring out how to absolutely fine tune them so that they are really, really performing at an extreme level.
For you, and a lot of what you teach and what you coach through with peak performance, it's not always about the work we're doing on the outside. It sounds like it's a lot about the work that we're doing on the inside.
Well, two parts. Someone could pull up a brand new Ferrari and it looks great on the outside. It's shiny. So they just waxed it. It's beautiful. But we open the hood and the engine's rusting. Would it still be worth the same amount as if you open the hood and there's a brand new shiny engine that was just cleaned, re-outfitted and completely optimized? No, those two cars are not worth the same. And the problem is most of us have no clue how to look at our engine. So we just gauge, abs and shape and body fat percentage, or what weight we are, or muscle mass. We kind of do these outside things and we don't pay attention to the actual engine.
We have a new set of challenges in today's society as we did 10 years ago. Have you noticed that there are common themes or common patterns in people today that are experiencing internal challenges?
Totally. Well, more than internal challenges at all. We call it the core four. And specifically for business people, I tend to specialize in like that 30 to 55-year-old business owner type personality or person. And there's predictable problems. I was talking to a guy the other day where he had accomplished so much and he reached out to possibly work together in coaching. And he's like, I'm one deal away from being a billionaire in my personal net worth. I've accomplished everything. He's like, if you've Googled me at all, you know that I'm a health nut. I take all these vitamins and supplements and I'm doing all these things to stay at the peak of my health. And before he could say another thing, I said, how's your relationship? And just smiled. And my brain said, either you're a unicorn and you have somehow figured out all three, or you're probably struggling in this area. And he said, let's say it's maybe the latter. I said, yeah, I thought so. I said, there's predictable problems. And for most people, it's because you're working so hard and life is so demanding and you're striving for such big success or results that all of a sudden your health starts to get a little off track, meaning you're not putting in the time. You're just eating whatever you can get at the airport. You're moving so fast that, I said, on average, most people should schedule about 3 hours a day to eat. And I watch most entrepreneurs get the wind knocked out of them when I say that out loud. They're like, 3 hours? Are you crazy? And I was like, I'm sorry. At least 30 minutes to eat each meal. So an hour and a half a day to eat. I don't know. Let me ask you, how many hours a day do you set aside for eating?
I eat a lot. So I get up normally roughly like on an average 4 a.m. And then I eat.
Cool.
And then I go to the gym. And then I come back and eat again. Mid-morning snack, lunch, afternoon snack, dinner. I don't know. I guess it probably is maybe like an hour and a half total of like just sitting down to eat.
And that's a high performance or bodybuilder type meal plan.
Yeah.
And so you're fully committed to a bodybuilder type meal plan and cadence where the time you eat it matters.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important. And are you able to turn off everything? To do some breath work before you eat, to calm your body, get it into rest and digest, that once you eat, you then take a slow, calm walk, do some breath work, allow your body to fully digest and use the nutrients before you move on to the next task?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so This is where, specifically in the US, or let's say North America, we're generally more concerned with productivity than we are our health.
Yeah, 100%.
So instead of giving our body the time, space, and ability to use the nutrients to the fullest extent possible, we attempt to be an F1 pit stop when it comes to fuel.
Mm-hmm.
We pull in and we give ourselves 3.2 seconds to dump the entire fuel tank through into our mouth.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
We're going to chew, swallow, and sprint out of the stop so that we don't lose the race today.
I mean, those are some great analogies. I'm finding as I've, worked to really develop my body that there's that last little percentage of body fat that I just, for whatever reason, can't seem to let go of. And as my wife got me an Oura ring within the last few months, I've been able to start to track some things. And it's like, oh no, she's right. I need to slow down. I need to take a little bit of a break. I need to be a little bit more strategic, invest just as much time, attention, and energy into my rest and restoration, for that matter, as I do into being productive.
Totally. And it's sleep and recovery. Sleep and recovery is the thing that'll release that last bit of fat. One of my friends wrote a whole book on this, and they took two groups of people, gave them the same workout plan, the same meal plan, the same routine. One of them got less than 6 hours of sleep each night, and the other one got 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep each night. The one who got better sleep lost 30% more fat over the same period of time. Same meal, same workout, 30% more fat loss based on better, high quality, consistent sleep. And then the other one, Kristen Holmes from Whoop. She's amazing. If you want to interview someone cool about performance, she's awesome. She spoke at a conference and she was saying, corollary, the number one predictor of longevity is your heart rate variability. That's according to $1 million study done in Silicon Valley to figure out what predicts how long someone lives. So heart rate variability is the number one predictor they could find. That predictor, the number one thing that caused her heart rate variability to go up was having a consistent sleep and wake time, going to bed at the same time every night and waking up at the same time every day at 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep, high quality, 20% REM, 20% deep. When she dialed that in, her heart rate variability went from 30s and 40s up to 100 to 120 each day.
That's fantastic. That is like literally, as I sit here today on this podcast, exactly the problem that I'm focused on solving, because my HRV balance has been an average of 41 since I've gotten the Oura ring. And I'm like, I started researching. I'm like, what is HRV?
Yeah.
Is it supposed to be down? Is it? It's like,
I signed up online. I'm like, there has to be a class on this HRV thing. Like, what is it? How does it work? How do I know if I'm doing it right? What is the right number for my age and stage of life? And the number one thing that I took away from that class was the trend is your friend. The trend is more important than the number. And the trend consistently should be a gradual up and to the right if you're doing it right. And they said that is the most important thing you can dial in. But then Kristen was the first person to tell me, here's exactly what I did. And here is the before and after snapshot of my HRV. And it was astronomically different. Like it was 30s and 40s to 100 and 120. Like that is a different universe of HRV. And she said it came down to going to bed and waking up at the exact same time every day.
I learned something today on the podcast. I appreciate that, brother. That was really helpful. I'm all into hacking performance and optimizing stuff. And what I've discovered in my short 33 years of life is that sometimes it's not about working more. It's about working intentionally. And this is a principle. We're talking about our personal health here, right? But this is a principle that applies to money. It applies to relationships. It applies to business. It applies to everything. And that's what I think people can take from this.
You just talked about money. I'll give you kind of a fun story. And I actually broke this down this morning. Let me find my notes. I was working with a client and we were reverse engineering a conversation around how something came to be. And so him and I were talking through this and I was asking him, he's been doing extremely well. This guy absolutely transformed his life. Like he had some addiction problems. He had some bad environment problems. He had some usage problems and his life was kind of struggling. And a couple of years ago, we started working in coaching And we started him on breath work every day. We started optimizing his sleep. We started to get him off of alcohol and any substances. We started to clean up his environment. We started to get him into some other healthy habits as well. And he called, like, we had a session today. We haven't talked on a session in probably a year and a half. So he just came back on, we were talking, and he's like, I got to tell you, I'm a different human being. Like, I feel happier. My brain's clear. I feel joy every day in my life. Like, I feel free. I feel alive. I feel like things are possible again. Like, I really feel like my life changed. I want to say thank you. I'm like, thank you. I mean, you're the one doing the work. I'm just kind of nudging you in the right direction and giving you pointers. But the key that happened, he says, you know, I need to figure out what's next from here. A lot of the stuff I was so focused on, I figured out wasn't really healthy for me. So I've had to release my grip on how I wanted things to be, realizing those aren't necessarily the things that are best for me in life. They're cool or they're fun or they're exciting, but they're not really the things that are going to cause me to have the best life I could imagine. I said, well, if you're going to vision cast again, reset your 10-year vision, what would that look like? And he said, honestly, I don't know right now. I think I need time to sit with it. And I said, in many cultures, they have words for this. They call it a walkabout in Australia. They call it a vision quest in American Indian. They call it thinking time in some of the business worlds or business circles nowadays. But the time to sit in quiet and think, to meditate, to breathe, and to listen and wait until your vision kind of lands and you're called towards something that you feel compelled to go after. So we need to create space in your life that doesn't randomly hit you when you're being busy. And so, you know, there's a book by Cal Newton called, Cal Newton's the author. I forget what the book is called. It's really good, but he talked about how many of the major breakthroughs in society, whether it was Abraham Maslow or certain writings or art, it all came from someone who was willing to more or less go into the woods by themselves and spend time alone thinking and being still to work through whatever life was presenting them. Rarely did they stand in the middle of a city, in the middle of chaos, and try to figure it out. Even Elon Musk, if you look at him, he generally has his little tiny house out on the middle of his SpaceX property where he's just sitting there tinkering with stuff, thinking through problems. He's not right in the middle of a nightclub with thousands of people around him trying to figure stuff out. He's kind of out in his own space. And so we were talking about it, and he's like, yeah, but I need to figure out, like, how do I, once I have the vision, how do I make it real? I was like, shoot, let me think through this. And I was like, you know, I just did something about, I think 6 or 8 months ago. I caught on to the private equity world, private equity, you know, alternative investments. And it started to become interesting where I was like, woo, this is fascinating. This is really fascinating. And as I started to catch on to the world or to the process, I clicked. I was reading books about it, taking courses on it. I was looking at all these different articles and watching videos and doing all this stuff. And I was like, I want to get into this world. Like there's a huge upside potential in that specific realm. I was like, this is really cool. And I was like, okay, well, how would I do it? What's my vision? And so I worked back on my vision. I was like, you know what? I want to own a piece of a private equity fund. Like, I want to be in it. Like, okay, cool. What are my options? How could I make this happen? So I got my vision, got extremely clear. And I was like, well, what difference will this make? How will this actually help? I know how it will help me, but how would this help the world? What difference would this make for other people? And I had a chance, you know, I think 4 or 5, let's say 2 or 3 months after that kind of thought that hit me, to invest in a fund. And you had to be a qualified purchaser. So you needed a minimum of $5 million liquid investable assets. And then it was $1 million minimum to get in. So my wife and I did it. We were like, okay, this is cool. But then my very first thought that hit me was, how do I help like my uncle do this? How do I help my friend? How do I help our family? How do I help my father-in-law? How do I help the people I really care about get access to this? Because the returns and the diversification is insane. I was like, how do I help? So I text my brother and I was like, hey, could I start a fund where they invest in me and I can take a lower amount, but then I can invest it into this larger one? He's like, no, that's technically illegal. I'm like, damn it. I was like, could I? I was trying to brainstorm. How could I help the people I love get access to something like this. And so I was working on it. I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'll just start my own fund and I'll lower the limit and I'll let them invest with me. So I was determined, and I was like, well, that might be hard. And I went through all these plans. And then eventually I got to a place where I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a list of some of the best people on earth I love to partner with, going back to partnership, to see if I could pull this off. So I made my list and I came up with one, and I was like, ooh, I'm going to see if I could partner with these people. And so, floated it by my brother, and he was like, no, they're not looking for partners. And I floated it by my dad, and he laughed. He's like, you don't have enough money to make that kind of comment out loud. And I like, bleh. And I was like, I have another way to do it. And he's like, oh, they won't do that with you. You don't have the track record. It's like, like he's really hating on me. I don't think he is. He's just giving me true resistance, which he was accurate on. And then I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to get bold and ask. And I said, before you ask, and this is something I learned actually from my dad, before you ask anyone for anything, sit down and brainstorm, do some thinking time around, how could I add genuine value to their world? What actual difference could I make? Not what I think is valuable, but what would actually be valuable to them. And I was like, okay, let me figure this out. So I sat with it and thought about it. And all of a sudden I went, ooh, I actually have a client and friend who specializes in something I think they might need. Maybe, might be wrong, but maybe. So I took that and I floated it in, and I piqued a little bit of interest. I said, you know what? I'm just going to go ask the guy. So we went to an event. I walked straight up to the gentleman who runs this specific fund. And I said, thank you for having us. It's a privilege to be here. I'd love to own a piece of your fund. And the two guys standing next to him who work with him and know me, I know them. They both laughed out loud. They were like, that's funny. And he laughed. The guy who I asked laughed at me. He was like, that's funny. I said, don't worry. I told my dad I was going to ask you. And he said, I don't have enough money to make that kind of comment, but I told him I was going to ask anyways. And he goes, oh, good for you. He said, what's that phrase? Maybe someday, and today's probably not that day, huh? Fair enough. I looked at my wife and I'm like, I don't think that worked. And then I asked, I said, hey, do you guys have anyone that specializes in this piece that works with you? And he looked at me and said, actually, no, we don't. I said, that's really interesting. I have a couple of friends who literally specialize in that. Maybe we could have a meeting and talk. And he goes, yeah, I'd be interested. I'd be open to that meeting. I said, cool. I walked away. Got told no 4 different times in 24 hours. And then 2 days later, I got a text. And it was from someone who works with them. And he said, hey, I don't know what you said to him, but he said he'd be open to allowing you to invest as a partner if there's alignment. I was like, holy smokes, what just happened? And I was like, that was bananas. Like, as far as I was concerned, I got told no 4 times in a row, and nobody was even interested in considering that as an option. It was laughable to all of them. And I looked back and I made a list. I said, well, what happened? I said, number 1, I had a really clear vision. Number 2, I had conviction. I knew why. Why was I wanted to figure out a way to make this available to people I love. 3 was I had resilience. I was getting told no by family, by friends, by associates, by him. 4, I sat down and said, how could I actually add unique value to him? Can I learn enough about what they're doing and find if there's any possible gaps that I might be able to fill in true value? Not what I think is valuable, but what they think is valuable. And then the final part was be prepared. So in that world, when you get invited to participate, you have to write a really big check. My wife and I slept about 4 hours that night, which is not good for our HRV. So we were trying to figure out how in the world we could put that level of money together. But we figured it out. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. It went from a vision about 6 months ago thinking I want to be part of something like this to a reality about 6-7 months later, just by thinking through the steps. A clear vision, a compelling reason why, having the resilience to continue to keep nudging into it, even though I'm being laughed at and told no by multiple people, a unique way to add value that might fill a true gap, and then being prepared when the opportunity actually opens up to be able to execute. Nothing would have been worse than to do all the first steps, get to the moment where they go, okay, you can participate. And I go, oh, I don't have any money to do that. That would have really sucked. And so it'd been like the door opened and I couldn't walk through. But we luckily were prepared and did it. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. What I found out later, and I didn't know this part, was my dad had been working for over 2 years with that same idea in mind, which is how do we make this available to more people? And so he had figured out how to change it from having to be a qualified purchaser, moving all the way to a qualified investor, which it doesn't sound like a big difference. It's a world of difference. Qualified purchaser, meaning you need a minimum of $5 million liquid investable assets. A qualified investor, accredited investor, you just need to be earning about between $200,000 and $300,000 a year of income and $1 million net worth, not including your main house. That is a huge difference. And so I've been reading the reviews on his book that went out, and a bunch of people are frustrated because they're not quite a qualified investor or accredited investor. The good news is there's legislation that's going through. I think it passed the Congress and now it's going to the Senate, but it's bipartisan. It looks like it's going to go through. That says instead of people being qualified based on how much money they have, because someone could have inherited money and have no clue how to invest, instead of being qualified by how much money you have, they're going to actually create a test someone can take to find out if they're actually qualified and understand how to invest. And if they understand how to invest and they can pass the test, then they'll become an accredited investor and they can get access to this type of stuff. And I was like, that is very cool. And so I didn't know. 2 years, Dad and team had been working on that in the background to figure out how to make that possible. And they finally figured it out. And he writes about it in his book. It's really cool. But that piece of really, really wanting to figure out how do I help the people I love get access to something like this, to support their, retirement and wealth building.
There's so much wisdom in what you just laid out. And it sounded to me as well, I don't know if you said it I don't think I remember you saying this, but for people that want to become high performers, sometimes they think that it's not even hyper, it's just they think that busyness leads to productivity. And what you're kind of saying is the opposite, is slowing down and really thinking through things and being patient. Things, tend to work themselves out when the brain gets a job, like it has something to go to work on.
Like you have to focus it on something, but then you have to give it space. My business mentor, who's bought and sold companies for 40 years, he exited his portfolio, made a 11x multiple on his EBITDA and got $110 million cash a few years ago. He told me, if I could tell you every business tool I've learned in 40 years, the most important business tool I have is what he calls thinking time. It's where you take one single question, you write it down, you put 30 minutes on a timer, and you sit with that question and you just answer that question over and over and over and over again. He said the first 5 minutes, you'll come up with surface level answers. The second 5 minutes, you'll start to get some real good ones. The last probably 10, 15 minutes is where you get the gold, where you really get the good stuff. And he said, the problem is most people, one, don't ever ask good questions and sit with it. And two, don't sit with it long enough. They'll spend 2 minutes brainstorming and go, yeah, I got the surface. And then they'll go behave on surface level answers instead of the real depth. Name of the book. We've talked about a few. Let me Google the Cal Newton book real quick for people so I could tell them what it was called.
Did you say Cal Newton?
Yes.
Cal Newton. I found one by Cal Newport while you were talking, but I didn't see.
Newport.
Is it Newport? How to Become a Straight A Student or How to Become a High School Superstar? Deep Work.
Deep Work. So book number 1 we talked about by Cal Newport. I'm so sorry I messed up your name, Cal. Was Deep Work. Book number 2 we talked about was my dad's new one. He just came out, called The Holy Grail of Investing. Book number 3.
Thinking Time. Would it be by Cunningham?
Yeah, Keith Cunningham, The Road Less Stupid.
Yeah, and if you're listening to that, like, well, The Road Less Stupid, it is a great business book. I highly recommend it. 100%.
Yeah. Really, really good one.
This has been a fantastic conversation, brother. I appreciate you spending some time with us. I know that we've gone a little bit longer than maybe we anticipated, but so much great wisdom. If somebody was listening to this and they were taking in the ideas and they're saying, okay, Jairek, I'm all in on what you're talking about, but what is my first step? Like, what is my first step towards building an extraordinary business or an extraordinary life? What would you tell them?
Oof. If you want support or you need clarity on like what you need, you're welcome to come to our website and book a session. And what I normally do is chat with people for 15 minutes and just find out where they're at, what they're working on, what they're wanting to accomplish. And if we have anything that can support them, we'll say, hey, check this out and send them a link. And if we don't, we'll say, ooh, I know who has that. That is Dad, or that is Mel Robbins, or that is Brennan, or that is whoever it is. We'll kind of just sort people to make sure that they get what they need to make the progress that they're going after. That might be a great first step. Come have a chat with us and see if we can help you figure out what path you're on and what the next best support system would be for you.
That's fantastic. I appreciate it, man. Such great conversation. I took a lot from it today, and I appreciate you again taking the time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for continuing to listen to the Grant Wise Show. This has been another fantastic episode of helping you understand how to build an extraordinary life. Leave a review. What was your greatest takeaway? Send me a DM on Instagram with your best questions. I want to make sure that we keep the conversation going. So thanks again, Jairek, and thank everybody else for continuing to listen to the show. We'll see you on the next episode. Peace. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Grant Wise Show. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, leave us a review, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks.